Now, Parliament is constitutionally mandated to hold the executive accountable, but did it fail to exercise its oversight role over Health Minister Zweli Mkhize last week when Mkhize failed to appear before Parliament's Committee on Health to answer questions regarding the digital vibe scandal? What he said last week was he was legally advised not to attend the meeting. Mkhize has now been placed on special leave by President Cyril Ramaphosa. So, did Parliament allow Mkhize to use the sub judice excuse to avoid being held accountable? I'm joined now by the Deputy Speaker of the National Assembly Lechesa Tsenoli. Mr. Tsenoli, thank you so much for your time on the lead this afternoon. Let's start by revisiting the role of Parliament. What is the role of Parliament when it comes to the executive?
Well, firstly, thank you very much for the opportunity to talk to your viewers and listeners. And the first point to make is that as members of Parliament, our first responsibility is to ensure, broadly speaking, the constitutional provisions, especially the socio-economic Bill of Rights, contained in the Bill of Rights, see the light of day for the majority of people in the country. That's the principal reason. Then the body that has been given the responsibility, so to speak, delegated, so to speak, by the Constitution to execute plans that will have to be approved by Parliament, in order to achieve that, is the job we do. In other words, we work with the people on the one hand, and about the needs and what they need to have done in order for themselves to have opportunities to do things they would like to do. And then in our interaction with the executive, with the plans they bring on the table to say this is how we are going to do that. That's the job we do essentially. And there are often assumptions that okay, let me put the overall political issue first, because this is always important, that the election produce results, and via manifestos that parties go to the public and say, this is what we do if you vote us. So when those in the executive do their work, and generally the majority, both in Parliament and in the executive, ensure that they do that to satisfy what the majority of people would like to see. That's the work of Parliament, broadly speaking. Yeah. We are a multi-party body, and so we have to negotiate that in Parliament with other parties about how that gets done and how appropriately do we do it, and so on and so on. So often there are conflicts that arises when any of these things are not done according to the wishes of the people on the one hand, and or when the laws of the country perhaps may not be fully followed.
So when we speak about the members of the executive being held accountable, would you say that Parliament played that role effectively last week when a member of the executive in Health Minister Zweli Mkhize failed to submit himself to the authority of this body that's constitutionally mandated to hold him accountable just because he was legally advised not to speak on matters because they are sub judice?
Well, it happens. In other words, that that's not the only reason that is often given for ministers to be unable to come to meetings for whatever reason when they were expected to do so. That on its own does not constitute failure of Parliament in the first place, because we can't drag them by the collar of their necks or have the police bring them there to come and do that. There is cooperative governance, which requires that, yes, they must be called whenever it is appropriate to do so, such as it was in this instance. Yeah. But in the event that they can't come, and they give reasons amongst others, such as was given, the committee may come to a conclusion that we would like to see that advice you got. For example, this is one of the ways to deal with it. So in and of itself, it's not failure for Parliament to hold.
But the chairperson of the committee, Mr. Tsenoli, the chairperson of the Parliamentary Committee on Health, actually failed to take the matter back to the committee. Some of the committee members said, how did you accept that justification? How did you just take that explanation from the health minister who said, on legal advice have been told not to appear before Parliament and discuss these matters. Their argument is the chairperson of the portfolio committee should have brought the matter to the committee, and then collectively they should have decided whether they summon the minister or they actually accept that explanation and give him another date to come and account.
Yes. That is a different matter. In other words, that has happened before, and that, of course, it can be done that way, that you do not, as chairperson, take the decision on your own. You interact with the committee and you take that decision. Oftentimes, committees have agreed with chairpersons that we condone what you did. That has happened in the past. And when they don't condone it, it does not mean it was failure of Parliament to do and hold the executive to account. It's a difference of opinion in the political parties themselves about a matter over which they have a difference of opinion. Strictly speaking, the necessary invitation was issued for him to come. He didn't come, and he gives that explanation. So the chair, instead of calling a meeting for that purpose to have that discussed, decides there is no need to do that. Let me go ahead and then go and talk to the committee, because we can always have another day to do the work itself. I don't think in and of itself, in my humble opinion, it constitutes failure of Parliament. The differences amongst members of committee and the chairperson in managing, doing things because there's a mandate generally, and or accountability, that you do things only when you have been told so by the entire committee, is a fine line. There is always a thin line between the two.
Yeah, but do you accept,
and it happens often.
Yeah, do you accept, though, Mr. Tsenoli, that the way that it was dealt with was not the best way? Because you cannot have members of the executive giving excuses like the matter is sub judice, and then the chair of the portfolio committee, whatever it is, accepts that explanation and wants to continue with the sitting and has not given that committee and the other members an opportunity to either agree or disagree with the explanation that a member of the executive is giving. Do you agree that that would set a bad precedent if we get to the situation where any member of the executive would come and say, well, on legal advice, I can't appear and submit myself before this body?
Yes. No, the issue, my position would be that we must always assume good intent and act forcefully and strongly only if we have incontrovertible evidence that there was malfeasance in the action that was mediated. Because it is not correct. It is also appropriate that a chairperson have a leeway to save the time of the committee to deal with other matters without abandoning dealing with issues of critical importance such as this one. And by the way, the activities of Parliament and committees on critical issues depend not only what they do, but also what others do who are related to them. In this instance, such as the presidency, who took the appropriate decision in this instance to relieve Mkhize at his request, as he says, from doing that work. Parliament and its committees, the chairperson and members of his committee often have these kind of matters before them. Whether the chairperson in making that decision was okay or it was not okay. Because it's a question of mandate. You can't run everything else by committee. Oftentimes leadership does mean you take action and then you account to the committee subsequently for them to condone or to say, no, you were wrong in doing that. In future, let's find the following way to deal with it. For example, that you communicate to us through a round robin. We don't necessarily call a meeting, and we indicate to you what our position is.
It's interesting
that
because
often happens.
Yeah, it's interesting, and we're out of time, Mr. Tsenoli, but just quickly, it's interesting because I was reading the Sunday Times, and the chair of chairs, Mr. Cedric Frolic, actually indicated that as Parliament, you've actually rejected that explanation by the Health Minister and the excuse, I'll call it that, saying, well, on legal advice, I'm unable to appear and talk on such matters. That's what the chair of chairs says. As the Deputy Speaker of Parliament, do you confirm that as Parliament you are rejecting this notion that members of the executive can use some legal advice to avoid being held accountable and to avoid appearing before committees that are constitutionally mandated to hold them accountable?
What I confirm is appropriate is that each committee and guidance from the committee section led by Honorable Frolik is an appropriate mechanism to reflect on the appropriateness of the reason given. You may call it an excuse, possibly it is, but it's not for me to judge that. Our initial response must be to expect that they will give good reasons. And if they don't, then they will get a response from the committee and or from other added structures of Parliament to say, we have considered the reason you gave to us for not coming and we don't condone it. This is why condonation is not automatic.
Yeah. So he should be coming back
and approved.
Yeah, so he should be coming back to come and answer the questions, the Health Minister.
No, that one is the job of committees, to ask the minister to come and explain.
Yeah, and
whatever else anybody else does.